Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Well, hello, Judy, and hello, viewers. We have an interview. This is our first repeat interview on our podcast. This is somebody we interviewed. I looked it up. She was episode 5. This is episode 41,
guests.
one of our early guests, and a delightful guest. We're going to be interviewing Dr. Bat Sheva Marcus today. And when we talked to her a year ago, we were talking about her upcoming book. And since then, her book has come out, and we've read it and enjoyed it and are recommending it to all sorts of people. And it'll be coming up. And yes, you can do a little show and tell for the book.
Her book, Sex Points.
Her book, Sex Points. So we're going to be talking to Bat Sheva. In fact, we already had this interview. It was delightful. And of course, we knew it would be. And sure enough, it was. So you'll get to see that. Before we do that, we would like to invite you to spread the word about this podcast, Couples Therapy in 7 Words. That means comment and rate us and like and share our posts on social media and all that kind of stuff that people do. And I've noted our listenership/viewership has been going up, and especially since we switched to video, I guess that seems to be a popular thing to do.
I guess people like watching.
Apparently so, and/or I guess it's possible to listen to these without actually watching them too.
That's
So
true.
who knows how you're consuming this, but we're glad you're here. And I mentioned the 7 words. Why don't we should mention the 7 words in this. We didn't mention it during Bat Sheva's
That's right,
interview.
we didn't.
So what are the 7 words?
The 7 words are be kind, don't panic, and have faith.
And those 7 words are the way that I organized the book I wrote that this podcast is really based on, and the book is
Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
And so we invite you, as always, to get a hold of the book. You'll see on this video, I've got a picture of the book looking at you, and you can go to my website, brucechalmer.com, to get information about how to get the book, or you can just get it any place you get books, your favorite bookstore or any of the online folks as well. So,
And it's also available on audiobook and
is.
as a Kindle. Yeah, an ebook.
as
Is
well
that what
as
they're
good old
calling it?
paper. Yep.
And good old paper.
And I do the narration on the audiobook, so you get to hear me read it.
Yeah.
So let's get to our interview with Bat Sheva Marcus. You'll hear Judy introducing Bat Sheva, and then you'll hear the interview, and we will be back afterwards. We'll see you soon.
We're delighted to have back as our guest today, Dr. Bat Sheva Marcus. Dr. Marcus is founder and clinical director of Mays Women's Sexual Health in New York City, the largest independent sexual health center in the United States. Dr. Marcus is a licensed clinical social worker with a master's in public health, a master's degree in social work, a master's degree in Jewish studies, and a PhD in human sexuality, for which her dissertation was on the topic of women and vibrator use. She has been called the Orthodox sex guru and the queen of vibrators. Dr. Marcus's book, Sex Points, released earlier this year, presents a comprehensive approach to treating sexual problems. To quote from the publisher's blurb, covering everything from how to choose a vibrator to recapturing orgasms, understanding hormones to rekindling lust, embracing taboo fantasies, and parsing complicated relationships to what sex really means. Hint, it's not just intercourse. Sex Points is a comprehensive, revelatory, I didn't know it could be this good guide for every woman at every age, in every situation. Bat Sheva, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you so much for having me back. It was so much fun last time, and I'm really excited about doing this again.
And I will say, you are our first repeat interviewee.
Oh my God, I'm so honored. That's amazing.
Well, and you should be, because, I mean, I don't mean
Well,
to say you
we're
should
honored
be.
to
We're
have
honored
you.
to have you, because we wanted you back because it was so much fun last time. And
So we'll be mutually honored, which is always a great
good.
place to be.
Good, and now we have your book that we can talk more about, but back then we were talking about your book that was coming out. So let's get right to it. So you talk in Sex Points about a lot of myths about sex. What do you think is the biggest misconception about women and sex?
So I would say this is the biggest misconception is it's not just women, it's all of us as a society kind of believe that sex is static, like that you get into a sex groove with whoever you're with, and that groove will stay the same for the rest of your life or the rest of your relationship. And the truth is that nothing could be further from the truth. Like, I think we all are aware of this, especially you as couples therapists, are aware of the fact that things are constantly changing, and your sex life is no different than that. And the sooner and the more comfortable we are with the notion that your sex life is going to change because of your health, because of your partner's health, because of the medications you're on, because of the situation of what's happening within the relationship, because of the physical, how much privacy you have, whether there are kids banging at the door, because for all of those reasons, because, your job situation's changed and each of you feel that's bringing up all kinds of emotions and feelings. Like, all of those things are constantly changing. And if we're equipped to understand that all those changes are normal and natural, but that they honestly require a response. Like, you have to know that, and that, at the first sign of a road bump, it doesn't mean that's the end of your sex life. If we all went into it with that as an idea, we would all be in a much better place. The problem is that most people, I feel like we have this mythology in our society that, like, oh, you kind of learn to have sex, you work out all those, like, kinks in the beginning. If you have kinks, some people don't have them, but let's assume most of us have them. And then whatever you're doing, that should just be the way it goes for the rest of your life. But I mean, we see it with exercise. We see it with eating, right? What we did when we were 25, what we did when we were 35 or 40, it doesn't work for you anymore. It's just different. And that doesn't mean that means that you should just stop exercising or moving. It just means that you got to figure out what works for you now. And so I think when people realize that, it stops throwing them off their game as much, and they go in with a much more realistic perspective. So if you ask me which myth, I think, and I don't think it's just women, I think men have that same exact myth as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, what you're pointing out. I hear this, in the couples that I work with. It isn't necessarily that they assume it's static, but what they assume is that these changes happen and they don't even think there's anything to do about them. So, well, when we first got together, we were, screwing like rabbits all the time and we just had a great time. But of course that goes away. And then of course, now we're at this point where he or she or they or whoever doesn't have much in the way of interest, and that's just the way it is, isn't it? And nobody stops to think, is there something they could actually do about that?
It's so funny. I had a patient the other day, just a couple of days ago. It's a woman who is in her late 50s who was saying to me she's having orgasm issues. And when we parsed it out, she always had orgasms from intercourse. And that's a tiny percent of the population, right? That's 30% of the population. But and this is a really well-educated, well-connected, smart woman. It just didn't really occur to her when she stopped having orgasms that maybe it was time to start thinking about other ways to have orgasms, since the old way wasn't working anymore. But she was so sad, and she, it really had a huge impact that it didn't need to have on their sex life because there were so many other solutions. Exactly what you're saying. Like, this idea that, like, it's not working anymore, I'm gone, I'm finished. And that's, I think, really, really can be very detrimental to relationships.
Mm-hmm. And, if since I read your book, I've been recommending it up and down. I probably should get a commission from your publisher, but whatever,
I will. I'll send you flowers. I'm so excited by that.
That's okay. But no, I've been recommending it because it's really wonderful. And for that very issue, and I think, the key point in independently of all the wonderful facts you got in there, which it's chock full of information, which is really helpful. But it's that meta point, that says, there's stuff you can do about this. And you can do it from multiple different angles, which is what I find so interesting about your approach.
Yes. I mean, I think if I could share one more myth while we're talking, because,
Sure.
I feel like the other myth is that if there's a problem with your sex life, it clearly means there's a problem with the relationship. And I feel like that is such a harmful myth. I mean, sometimes it creates a problem in the relationship. And I feel like, Bruce, I kind of feel like you and I went back on this a little bit early on. I don't remember with when your book came out a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
About that, right? Like, this idea that immediately people assume that if your sex life is in the toilet, then therefore it must mean that there's something going on with the communications or the relationship, but that's not the case. And so the problem with that is, with that idea and keeping that myth, is twofold. One is, if you don't fix the sexual problem, often it creates a problem in the relationship. So you're like back to that start. And two, you could spend months trying to work out this like supposed, we look, and I'm sure you would back this up. Even in good relationships, there's always issues. It's not like,
Oh yeah.
Except for yours. Yours is perfect, right? And mine.
Other than ours, yes. Exactly.
Exactly. Other than ours, but you could spend months sort of parsing out interactions, current, in the ways you're working with each other, and all you're doing is hashing out things when what you really need is just to fix your sex life. So, and that will have, I believe, ripple effects on the rest of the relationship. So that would be a second myth, that it's always that the sex is always a reflection of the relationship. So yeah.
One of my favorite parts of your book is where you warn people against people like me. and I've said that to clients. I smile as I say it, because I think it's wonderful, because it's true, and of course, as we mentioned this in the our last podcast too with you, you offered incredibly helpful feedback on an earlier draft of my book, and I made some changes based on it, probably not as many as you would have liked, but nevertheless I did make some changes based on it. Yeah. And it was all about that. It was the idea, I come from this as a couples therapist. I'm thinking, well, it's all about relationship, isn't it? And you're pointing out it is about
Not
relationship,
always.
but not
Not
only
always.
about, yeah. And that just a very useful thing.
No, and I'm laughing. I just need to clarify. Of course, like I feel like couples therapists are so important. Good, solid, couple therapists are like such an important ingredient of this, because if somebody comes in and they're furious at their partner and they're harboring anger, or they're keeping score, which we've talked about, like that's not going to help the sexual relationship. Like you do need a baseline relationship that works, right? Like if somebody comes in and says to me, I want to have sex with everybody but my husband or but my wife. Okay. That sends off little bells in my head, right? That's just different than somebody who says like, I love my partner, I just don't want to have sex. And that feels very different. So couple therapists are such a critical piece of this. It's just that sometimes, and also what I think couples therapists don't always realize is that even if you fix the sexual problem, sometimes you have to help couples sort of put it back into the bedroom. I mean, I'm sure you see it all the time. Like, it's been 6 months, it's been a year, we haven't had sex. Like, let's figure out, she's in pain. She's got menopause, she has pain. We can fix that. It's super easy to fix that. This is where this is where like I'm laughing because the gynecologists are probably saying, oh, Bat Sheva's warning off of you. The gynecologist fixed that problem, but then they need the therapist to kind of get him back into the bedroom. So yeah, I think it's all
I think
a team.
that was what Bruce was talking about. The other side that he hadn't considered was the physical, and that's, so much of what you bring to it.
Right. But I just feel like they're so inextricably linked. Like they have to be working together. So I just want it to be really clear. It's not like I think you can just toss testosterone or estrogen at a woman. So and say, here you go, bye.
Yeah. So one of the things you do in the book is you classify sex problems into 4 areas. Desire, pain, orgasm, and arousal. And if you want to speak to those distinctions, that would be helpful. And in particular, because I hear people are often surprised. I'll mention again, I'll quote your book, there is a difference between arousal and desire, or I guess libido would be kind of synonymous with desire, right? But not arousal. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. And I knew you were going to go there. As soon as people as soon as therapists start talking about, yes, because I feel like we have not done a good job in study of separating those two. And I'd love your feedback. I'd love to think what you see about those two things. The 4 areas, so I'll just review them. So they're pain, and that seems pretty clear to people what pain is. It could be extreme. It could be not extreme. It could be, changeable over your life. Orgasm, people sort of get that one as well. That feels kind of like its own category, although it is very linked to some of the others. But the 2 that I feel like I've parsed that I think is helpful to people is desire and arousal, and how that those are different things. So desire is, I wanted to have sex. I have the interest in having sex, and that might not be spontaneous desire. It might not be, I wake up in the morning and I want to have sex, but rather when I wanted to have sex, it is accessible to me and I can get there. Right? And we can talk more about that. Arousal is, I get turned on. My body responds. I get tingly. I get wet in some cases. I get more and more turned on, and that's sort of what leads me to have good feelings while I'm having sex. That also means turning off the laundry list that's in my head, right? All that list of things I have to do. So people often will say, oh, so you're saying desire is psychological and arousal is physiological. And I will say, no, they're both, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the best way to understand the difference is that I'll have a patient and she'll say to me, Bat Sheva, I've been married 30 years. I adore this person I am married to. I want to stay married to him, let's say to him. And I don't want to have sex with him. I just don't want to, I don't have sex with anybody. And then
I have to tell you, the letter we are going to read you, you practically just quoted. Just saying.
because I see it every week, 3 times a week in my office,
I'm sure
right?
you see that every day.
Exactly. So I promise you guys, I didn't write the letter. Okay. So
No. I know that because
but then when you're talking to this woman, for example, she'll say, when we have sex, it's actually really good. I do get turned on. I do have an orgasm. It all feels really good to me. And then my husband is like, oh my God, that was amazing. Let's do it again. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to do it again. And he thinks I'm crazy and I think I'm crazy, right? So that would be, her desire isn't there, even though the arousal and the orgasm are working just fine, right? Now let's take somebody else who says to me, and I see this all the time, I really, really want to have sex. Like I get there, like I get into bed, I get into the shower, whatever I do, and then nothing happens. I just, I can't stop thinking about picking up my kids after school or, the lesson I have to give, and my body isn't getting turned on and nothing happens. It's like dry toast. And so that makes me feel terrible. And then that will affect desire, obviously, but it is a separate thing. And I think for me, it's really important because I feel like it's helpful to approach it in a more pinpointed way, both from the biopsychosocial, right? From the biology, because I think there's different things going on. And although to some degree they're overlapping, and also from a psychological perspective, like how do you help people? So, and I feel like that is often a relief for women to hear that. I'm actually really curious what you think, because I feel like they're like a light bulb goes off in their head. They're like, oh my God, Bat Sheva, yeah, you're right. I mean, what's your experience been?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I see that light bulb in both. If I have a heterosexual couple, which is most of the couples I work with, in both partners, that light bulb will go off. Oh, I mean, the husband and the wife, the wife is thinking, yeah, wow, that explains it. And they didn't realize those are two different things. And the husbands are often, on the one hand, glad to hear it. And on the other hand, oh boy, what do we do about this? But the orientation that would say, you're not crazy, and maybe there's some things you can do about this, is a really helpful thing. And you can just see people that, they'll often sort of stop fighting about it at that point, and then they can say, all right, well, maybe there's something we can really do about this. So yeah, that is a distinction that people often find really interesting.
It's what's fascinating,
and then, of course,
about
what to do about it.
This may be going like too deep, but like the DSM-5 actually merged arousal and disorder, which drives me crazy. So they used to be separate disorders, and they merged them as interest disorder, interest and desire and interest, or interest and arousal disorder. And I know why they did it, because it takes time. This is where the therapists really are needed. Like, it takes time to parse that out. It takes time to explain what I just said to you in a way which is a new way. And so, when you're trying to develop, diagnoses which are like on a conveyor belt, it's just easier to lump them together. So it bothers me, but
it's interesting though, because it's funny. I spend very little time with the DSM-5.
Good for you.
Well, pretty much everybody who has insurance, those are the ones who need the diagnoses, and I diagnose them with adjustment disorder, not otherwise specified. And I'm not being dishonest about that. It's the stuff happens diagnosis, and they're coming to see me because stuff is happening. So it does fit. But that idea, it's interesting to me that the DSM would do that, because the whole idea supposedly of diagnostic categories is they're associated with particular treatments. And of course, what you're saying is these two different things call for two very different kinds of treatments.
I think I believe me, I've had arguments with people about this, but I had an argument with one of the top specialists in sexual dysfunction, a male, because whatever he whatever. No, I just and he was like, they can't exist separately. And the fact that he was sitting in a room with me saying to me, it's not possible that a woman can get really turned on and have great sex and still not want sex. To my mind, I know exactly. So I was like, you know what? We'll just agree to disagree, and you're right too.
Mansplaining? I mean, seriously? I mean, that's the thing. I could see saying that to a male colleague as long as you're speculative and say, I don't know, that's not, I hear different things from women, but to say that to a woman who's telling you different,
Correct.
seriously?
And also, like, I just feel like, is he listening to his patient? Because that's not
Probably
even something
not.
that's even vaguely like, anyway, but let's not go down that rabbit hole because you don't want to hear me kvetch. So
Yes.
it's not fun.
Speaking of rabbit holes,
Perfect segue.
what a great segue. So,
Yes, this
as
could
I
go in a number of different directions.
yes, it can. But as I mentioned in the intro, you are known as the queen of vibrators, right? So talk to us about the role of vibrators and other sex toys in enhancing sex life.
So I love vibrators. I feel like they're one of the most underused tools in women's sexual arsenals. And I'm laughing because the rabbit is actually, I laugh because people know about the rabbit, even though I think
Right.
the rabbit is one of the least useful of the vibrator options out there. And if anybody's interested, just if anybody's listening is interested, I have a free 3-part course, like Intro to Vibrators, on the Maze Women's Sexual Health website. You could just go to that site, go to Vibrators.
Which I
There's a
have
3
watched. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm like, I always
And
wonder if
I'll
anybody's
put-
watching my stuff.
People who are watching this video, I will put the link to
The
that.
link, right? Because I feel like it's really important, because I feel like people get very overwhelmed with the idea of vibrators, and kind of understandably, because if you go like online and you start looking at, there's like 7 million vibrators out there and you kind of don't know where to start. But what's really important to know is that there's really 4 or 5 different varieties of vibrators, and then everything else, once you understand that, everything else is just, variations on a theme, and that makes it much more comfortable to make a decision about where you want to start. Having said that, what I love about vibrators is that it makes arousal and orgasm much more accessible to most women. And it does it without changing your body chemistry, without a major investment in time, without any of the sort of concerns and problems that people have with taking medication. And in general, I have to say, my experience with orgasm issues, or is that especially secondary orgasms where you used to have them and you don't have them anymore, they're echoes of what they used to be. Those tend to not resolve with a lot of talk therapy. In my experience, those tend to be much more physiological, and it's completely treatable. Totally treatable. And there's some drugs that are very helpful with it, but vibrators are just so easy. They're accessible, they're inexpensive, and they're fun. And so for most women, and so I'll just repeat the statistics so that everybody has it, 30% of women can orgasm from a penis and a vagina alone. That's 3 out of 10 women. 80 to 90% will have, 70 to 80% will have an orgasm from a partner's hand or mouth, or their own hand. Your own mouth is, I don't know how somebody would do that, but yes.
I'll bet there are people who can do that.
Probably, but yes. And 93 or 94% of women can have an orgasm with a vibrator. So that leaves,
Significant.
Exactly. It's a significant percentage. And the hesitation for women to use vibrators tend to be, if it feels like, this is where I was doing my dissertation on, I was trying to explore with women, like what stops women from using vibrators when it's such an pleasant and easy experience. So some of it is that it feels like it's not natural, and we can address that. And some of it is because they're afraid their partner is going to take that, like it's not going to be an easy bridge to their partner, and we can talk about that. And somehow they feel guilty, like somehow the gold standard of orgasm is penis and a vagina.
Right.
The silver standard is what you have with a hand or mouth, and that runner-up bronze is the one you have with the vibrator. But I think it's just time that we rejigger that. Like, it's so absurd.
Yeah.
Like, where did we come up with this idea that orgasms are better one way than the other? Because they're not. And so I'd say to any woman and man listening to this podcast, if your wife or your partner or yourself are finding that those orgasms are weaker, more elusive, echoes of what they used to be, or you're just having trouble having your first orgasm, a really good way to start is with a vibrator. And I'll just tell you, like, the book talks about it. The book does give you an introduction. I have that 3-part course. And the one thing I will say to any woman who's thinking, oh, maybe I'll get started, is you don't want an internal vibrator. This is our androcentric view of sex. People think about vibrators very often as those conical, like the long, thin ones that are meant to go in your vagina, but your vagina is not what's giving you the neurological stimulation to give you an orgasm, your clitoris is. And so you're really looking for one that looks a little bit more like a microphone, like the little black dress of vibrators is that like little microphone ones. There's great ones out there now. They're all chargeable. When I started in this field, they all had plugs, and I was like, you got to be careful not to strangle your partner, but that's not a problem anymore. So
don't do it in the bath.
yeah, exactly. Oh, well, a lot of them are waterproof. That is what's crazy. A lot of them are waterproof. Now, waterproof, cordless. Anyway, it's a whole new world with vibrators. So I would say to your listeners, like, that is such a lovely, easy way to start. And if we could talk about the whole partner issue because, I'm sure you deal with that all the time. I would guess that you deal with that. So,
that I want to mention a variation on the theme of hesitation that I've heard of a woman saying that if I get a vibrator, I'm worried if my mother finds out about it, she'll think there's something wrong with my marriage.
Oh, that's a new one.
Wrinkle on that one. Yeah.
Oh my God, that is such a new one. So she was okay with it. Her partner was okay with it, but she was somehow afraid that somebody else, in case her mother, would think that there was a problem. I wonder if that's an echo of somehow in her heart of hearts, she believes there's something wrong with her marriage.
Oh, I suspect so. Yeah. I mean, or at least, sort of, it's a reflection of those sort of cultural
right. I
myths
think what you were saying earlier, that if you need a vibrator, you think, well, what's wrong with our sex life that I can't achieve orgasm with just my partner or just myself?
And the androcentric thing too. It's the idea like, well, if your man can't give you an orgasm, what's the matter with him or what's the matter with your marriage?
Right, exactly. And even though the partner could be using the vibrator on you as well. I have, I'm on Instagram a lot and a little on Facebook also. I think I put this on Facebook also. When women say to me, it's not natural, the vibrator's not, like, I'm worried, but I start laughing because I'm like, so neither are electric light bulbs, right? But you don't live with candles because I mean, like, that would be a really inefficient way to run your life. So
that music you're playing when you're having sex, that's not natural either.
Exactly. You got to listen to the birds. So I think so for so much of this, it's re-education, and so much of this is useful to do with a therapist. That's why I'm trying to get this. I've been trying to get the message out to people to use the book with therapists. Like, I don't see it as a replacement. I feel like it's so helpful because this is a classic example. They can read in the book, oh, vibrators will be helpful. Vibrators could use, and some women will be able to integrate that. And some couples are going to just need some help, like thinking it through, talking it through, kind of understanding their own concerns and their reluctance, understanding the partner's concerns, understanding how they're putting their concerns on their partner, like they're projecting them. So for all those reasons, some of these solutions are really, really useful to talk through with your therapist.
Yeah. This might be a good segue actually into our letter because we're going to see some of these things are going to come up. And particularly, I think that last point about working with a therapist, not necessarily a sex therapist, although a sex therapist can be very helpful, but even working with a couples therapist around these issues informed by this. But you want to?
Sure.
I'm going to interrupt for one second, just tell you something, which I think is so interesting. Maybe a week or two after the book came out, I got a letter from somebody, and a woman who said to me, and I'm hearing this in my office all the time, but this was so poignant when she wrote to me. She said, I'm crying as I'm reading. I read the book. I feel like our sex life has been terrible for the last 20 years. And I'm feeling like maybe there's hope. And she said, it's so private, I can't talk to it. Even my beloved, this was the quote, even my beloved therapist who I've been seeing for 10 years, I haven't talked to about it. And when I was speaking to a group of therapists and I was reading this, I said, you should have ice in your veins when this comes up, because we think that because we think we're comfortable talking about sex, that our clients are, but sex is different than many other things. And as therapists, we have to keep raising it with people because they're not able to talk about it themselves. And so I think it's like amazing that you do that, and amazing. And I'm like so trying to push their general therapists. Not everybody needs a sex therapist. That would be like a therapist saying, I never talk about any traumas because they need a trauma therapist. That's ridiculous. Of course, you're going to talk about it. At some point, you're going to say, look, you really need a trauma therapist. But for most run-of-the-mill issues, most therapists, if they're comfortable and can get comfortable, can be handling these issues. And I think it's amazing that you're doing it. I just want to say that.
Well, and I'll mention, this could take us down a whole different road, which we won't go on. But the other thing, it's interesting because I bring up sex routinely. If they don't mention it, I ask about it, usually in the first session. But also, things like religion and spirituality. That's another thing that people don't talk to their therapists about, because often they sense, probably correctly in a lot of cases, that their therapists freak out at the very notion.
That is
And
so
so
interesting.
And don't know how to talk
and
about
don't know
it.
how to talk about
Right.
it. So I always make it clear that I'm happy to hear about that, and I talk about my own orientation around that.
That is fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. That is really interesting. I'm sure you're right. I'm sure now that I'm thinking about it, I'm sure you're 100% right. And therapists are just really uncomfortable. So
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we do have this letter. I do want to say that we have had this letter on before with, as we mentioned to you in the pre-show, with Susan Bratton, who's a sex advisor, not a therapist. But we wanted to get your take on it because, everybody comes from it with a different approach. So this is the first time we're using a letter twice.
okay.
So Ellen writes, Dear Dr. Chalmer, Bob and I have been married for 27 years. We have 3 children, 1 in high school and 2 in college. We have a really good marriage. We share many of the same interests and hobbies. We enjoy traveling and cooking together. We go contra dancing. We play in a local orchestra. We are active in our church. But when it comes to sex, I have very little interest. Somewhere along the way, my sex drive has dwindled to the point where I don't care if I never have sex again. Bob has been very patient and understanding. Sometimes I give in just because I don't want to deprive him of sex, but I get no pleasure from it. He tries very hard to satisfy me, but I just don't have orgasms. I'm not sure if I ever did. When we first got together, we had a lot of sex and I enjoyed it, although I never had those waves and rushes you hear so much about. I did ask my doctor about it, and she said she could put me on hormones, but I'm not sure I want that. I don't want to feel like having sex is a chore, but that's what it seems like. I know some women say their sex drive goes away during menopause, but that it comes back. I went through menopause 3 years ago, and it still hasn't come back. This has actually been going on for about 10 years. Bob says it's okay if I don't want to have sex. He doesn't want to pressure me into doing something I don't want to do. But I'm afraid if I don't, he'll look elsewhere. I'm really torn and I don't know if I should go on hormones or just pretend I'm enjoying it or see a sex therapist. I'm really not sure what to do next. Any advice? We turn it over to the sex expert.
Yeah. So that you just took my job and you just put it in a box, right? Like exactly. So I think the first thing I would say is I would say to her, get my book, because my book exactly, let's parse this out.
I would too, by the way.
Thank you.
And
Right.
I say that to people in this situation. Yeah.
Right. No, I appreciate that. I think that is exactly, it was a letter like that's exactly what the book is. There's a lot of things going on here and we're going to make some guesses. I'm going to make some guesses with you as to what's happening and where to get started. But, a woman, what's her name?
Ellen.
But Ellen would be the best judge of, okay, this is making sense for me, Bat Sheva, and this is not, which is why the book opens with a questionnaire, right? It's not a tricky questionnaire at all. Like that, all it does is help people clarify for themselves what is happening. So she's coming in saying to you, I have no desire. But then pretty quickly she switches and talks about the fact that she doesn't get turned on and she doesn't have orgasms. So we don't really know at this point, and it would be hard. We'd have to guess or work with her to figure out, is the lack of desire a result of the inability to get turned on and have, like, the sex is so bad, like someone said, like she doesn't, or is it completely independent? And those both things are hanging together. And this orgasm issue, is it because she can't get turned on? Or is it because she hasn't had enough education and information? So in each of those cases, I would address them depending on kind of where she believes the starting point might be. Probably I would start, like I think that I'm pretty hormone based, right? And you froze up for 1 second. You said my doctor offered me, did she offer her hormones? She offered her estrogen? She offered her testosterone? We don't really
hormones.
know.
Hormones.
Okay.
Just to put me on hormones.
Usually when doctors put you on hormones, women say that they're putting you on estrogen. And estrogen can be extremely helpful for certain things like hot flashes, memory loss, mood swings, right? Estrogen is less helpful, although you do need a base of it in order for your sex drive. For sex drive, what we see as the most impactful is testosterone. And people think of testosterone as being a male hormone, which it is because men have much more of it, but women need it. And the analogy or the story that I often tell that I think often is a light bulb moment, which I might have said last time I was on the podcast, so I apologize if I did, is when, you're in line to see it pre-COVID or whatever, you're in line to see a movie and you see two 17-year-olds and they cannot keep their hands off each other, right? They are climbing all over each other, right? Your reaction is not, oh my God, they must have had such a meaningful conversation. Like that is not your reaction, right? Like that is, or he must have sent her beautiful flowers or he did the dishes today or whatever it is. Like that is not what you think is their hormones are raging, right? We're totally comfortable and aware of it when we're looking at teenagers and young adults. Yet we turn 40 or 50 or 60 and all of a sudden this discussion of hormones is, oh, it can't be hormonal. It can't be, it must be the relationship. It must be the conversations. It must be the dishes, whatever. Anyway, so I'm a big believer in hormones. And I would say to this woman, go somewhere and look at your hormones because testosterone works as a base coat paint. And that is really important. And if it's gone, it's like trying to get a 10-year-old girl interested in sex, right? You can do whatever you want, but she's not interested in sex because her body isn't androgenized, right? Her body isn't hormonally set up to want sex. So you could try lots of other things, but it will often feel like you're fighting yourself. And so I would say, and that testosterone base coat paint works for desire. It also does work for arousal and orgasm. So I will say that. The second thing I will say, and I have a whole section in my book about getting your brain back in the game. Because what happens is that we turn off our brains, like especially mothers raising kids, you stop thinking sexy thoughts. Now, some of this is still hormonal, right? Like, what do you think puts thoughts into your brain? If the 17-year-old boy is thinking about sex all the time, it's hormonal, right? Like it's not so, but you can have a lot of impact on how your brain functions. We're understanding, I have a whole section on neuroplasticity and, and fantasies, because when you stop using a part of your brain, when it tends to essentially atrophies, right? And you can get that part back by working on the fantasies. Now, it always is a little bit of a balancing act. And this is where, like, if I start with a woman and it's too hard, I'll say, look, we'll start, but we need to talk about the hormones because it does take months for that hormones to kick in. It's not like you wake up one day and all of a sudden you're like, it's not like a pill and you get up, antibiotics. 3 days later, you're like all better. But the hormones can have an impact. It's subtle and it's dramatic, but it is, it makes it easier to fantasize. But then you have to actually work on the fantasizing. Like you can't just, the analogy I sometimes give is with Viagra. If you hand a guy Viagra and he goes off to the basketball game, he's not going to get turned on, right? You got to give the Viagra and do something to turn him on, right?
Depending on his sexual orientation, but just saying.
Okay, that's totally true. Okay, or how short the basketball shorts are. Totally. But if he's interested in the game, let's say, but yeah, so play Monopoly, whatever. Okay, so you have to give the medication and then you have to have the stimulus is put on top of it. And so with a woman, if you're going to give her testosterone or testosterone and estrogen, you also need to start working with her on refinding that part of the brain and seeing if she can get that part of the brain functioning better again. And that's really, really critical. So that's the second thing I would say. And a third piece is, vibrators could be extremely helpful in this situation because she's never had an orgasm. I don't know what the story is. Like, why has she never had? Has she thought she should have them from intercourse, like we were talking about before, which is super common? Is that something she's willing to think about and explore, right? If we can get the sex to feel better and to give her pleasure, then that will have a secondary impact on the desire. So all of those pieces are, because this is what I love so much about that letter, by the way. And I love it because she spends so much time talking about how great the relationship is. And it sounds like I'm like, oh my God, this sounds like an amazing relationship. And she's, it's also fascinating that she's in that catch-22 that so many women fall themselves in. Like she's saying, I want to have sex. I don't want him going somewhere else. Of course she doesn't want him going somewhere else. But I would say to her, you deserve to feel good about yourself and your body and want sex. Like that is such a gift. So, it is something that you want to do for him, but it's also something I want you to do for you because it makes us feel alive. When we're sexually connected to ourselves, it's a different quality of life. We feel really good. I mean, I think we really feel good about that. And so the one thing I will 100% say is pretending is usually not great. Like going along, getting yourself in the mood and going along with having sex once a week or whatever in a very positive way and figuring out the good things about it, that's great. Pretending you're into it and pretending you want to when you don't.
Or faking orgasms, for example.
Or faking orgasms.
Not a good plan.
It's a terrible plan, and it doesn't usually have any sustainability in my experience. Like you can do it a little bit, but you can't do it longer. So I'm sure my answer was quite different than the other
Actually, not
Versus-
really.
It overlapped.
Okay.
But
Okay,
I'll
well,
tell
that's
you,
good.
there was one thing that well, of course, this is my orientation as a couples therapist, because we don't know this person, of course. This is a letter we get, and we don't know the person. But what I'm hearing sort of between the lines, what I'm projecting onto this, I suppose, is I wonder if she, when you talk to her about things like, okay, there's the hormone, you can come from the hormone angle. You can also come from learning how to fantasize, learning how to let yourself get into it. That's the part I wonder if she even knows that that's a possibility, because there's so many people I work with where they grew up and it just never occurred to them that it's okay to have wild fantasies.
That it's
It's
good to
okay.
have, not okay. It's good that you need
Yes.
Yeah, that's why she
You
needs
totally
your
need that.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you
Can you?
absolutely, yeah.
I was going to say, can you talk a little bit about? We didn't even touch on this. Your sex points, and you brought up a little bit with the questionnaire. Can you go into a little bit for our listeners and viewers about your book and about the sex points and the questionnaire?
Well, it's based on essentially the whole conversation we've been having that people think of what's wrong with my sex life, like what's broken, let's fix it, Bat Sheva. That's all, like it's binary. But that I think a much better model for people to go after is that you need 100 points to have good sex. And those points, you could have 160 points, but you just, let's say and it's like a made up threshold. I'm saying you need 100 points to have good sex. And those points can come from so many different aspects of your life, and they can be taken away by aspects of your life too. And that's, like I said, your health or your hormones or your fantasy life or the vibrators or, the lock on your bedroom door or your ability to communicate with your partner or your partner's erectile dysfunction or your partner's, low hormones as well. Like all of these things, or the norms of the sexual relationship that you've gotten locked into over 15 years. All of those things are constantly giving you points, taking away points. And so the idea of the book is to really approach it from the most broad perspective and say, like, where can I get points from? And so some, like, you have 2 kids and they're 6 and 8 years old. Well, you know what, those points are those point taker awayers, which they're that you can't do anything about that. They're with you for the next 10 years. You know what I mean?
I've occasionally suggested just give away your children.
Exactly.
People don't tend to take to that.
I know they're just not really they must be very problematic patients.
Yeah.
So we're all or religion. I mean, there's a million things where things are going to give you points and things are going to take away points. And you just got to roll with the points. Like, you got to roll with the punches. You got to realize there's always places to get some points and always places where you are going to lose points. And the fantasy one is so remarkable to me because people feel like the idea of working on your fantasy life feels like anathema to people. Like, I don't get it. Like, I thought fantasies just pop into your head. And like, it is true. And this is where I always warn people, it shouldn't be so hard. Like, if you're working on it, and you still can't seem to fantasize, I would say, let's look at your hormones. But for most people, when you start working, when you understand that learning to fantasize is a practice, just like so many other things in our life, it all of a sudden is like, oh, and it's fine. And women, for some reason, they are so good at feeling guilty about their fantasies. It's crazy to me. Like, it's just like, they don't think they should fantasize about other people. They don't think they should be fantasizing about other women. They don't think they should be fantasizing about, things that are more forceful. Women will feel guilty about any fantasies. Right. Yeah. And a therapist can do a huge service to people by letting them process the fact that it is just, not only is it normal, it's like important to be able to sometimes I laugh. I say to women, really, you got married when you were 25 and you thought you were going to be fantasizing only and thinking only about this one partner for the next 60 years. Doesn't that sound psychopathic to you? Like, it's just crazy. Like, where did we get that idea? So, yeah.
Well, but there's an answer to that question. Where do we get that idea? There's lots of places we get very specifically that idea. And it tends to be toxic to people feeling alive and sexually alive. These ideas that say, especially for women, and I'm not going to mansplain to the women in the conversation here, but I hear this a lot from women, exactly what you're saying, that sense that they feel guilty about anything that is outside of some norm that's been imposed on them. And men to a slightly lesser extent, actually men to a lot lesser
largely
extent,
my experience is that men have this is one area where men have a much easier time. They do not have the same baggage. I don't know, it'll be interesting. That would be a really interesting PhD thesis. But I feel like women, yeah, this is one area where I feel like men seem to have a much easier time allowing themselves some space.
Oh yeah. You know what I hear from men is that they're afraid to tell their wives about it. But they're not, I don't hear from men saying, oh, I feel so terrible that I have these fantasies about some, sexy movie star. I hear
No,
from men
no.
that I can't talk to my wife about it.
And legitimately, they're afraid to tell their
Yeah.
wives because the wives freak out because the
Yeah.
wives don't realize like that's great because that's what turns him on. And you guys are having great sex as a result of that. So
I often point that out to people. It's like, you do realize if you're sexually alive, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. You realize if he's attracted to women and you're a woman, that's good, not bad, right? You do get that, but it's a tough one for a lot of
So
folks.
that's one of the great things that I like about your book is that it does give people permission to fantasize, to role play, to do all these things that will enhance your sex life, that I think people need to hear and don't hear enough. It's like not like when you're having sex education in junior high school, they're telling you, oh yeah, have fantasies, use a vibrator. That's not what comes up. It's don't get pregnant.
Yeah. But and implicitly, in fact, don't have sex.
Yes. Yes. Many programs, that's the main emphasis. They don't teach you how to pleasure yourself. For example, they don't teach you, if you can't pleasure yourself, how are you going to pleasure somebody else? Right. So that's not what they're teaching you. So thank you for your book.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for saying that you use it with your clients because almost nothing makes me happier than to hear of therapists using the book with their, I feel like that is the most powerful way for this book to be used. So thank you for saying that.
Well, gee, thank you for writing the book. I mean, and that is interesting. Of course, it's always great when somebody writes a book to fill a niche that wasn't filled.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you know way more about the other books that are out there, but I don't know of one like this. And I don't think there was one until you wrote that.
I don't think so either, but it's my book. So of course I would say that, but yes.
Well, we're glad you wrote it and we're happy to promote it and Bruce can tell all his clients about it.
No, which I do quite a lot. So, gee, what I'm tempted, well, I will ask you this, but what are you up to next? Like, what's your next book?
Oh, that's so funny. I'm not sure. First of all, you never ask somebody who's still 6 months out of a book launch what their next book is, because I don't know how you feel, Bruce, but I feel like I'm never writing a book ever again about anything.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Yeah.
But I will say that one of the things I've been doing a lot of thinking about recently is a very similar approach to weight and body image.
Wow.
Because I feel like that's another area where we have bifurcated the physiological and the psychological, and nobody is putting them together in a way that seems like it makes sense to me. And there's so much shame. Like there's just, it's so, when you start thinking about them, they're so parallel. And so I am sort of thinking a little bit in that direction. But in the meantime, I'm busily still trying to promote the book, trying really hard to get therapists and OBs to use the book, and just like learning more. The truth is, this is still the dawn of women's sexual health, medical, health. There's still so much we just don't understand. It was so funny. Yesterday, I had a client who said to me, I really think that when I went on my statins, it made my orgasms weaker, or I couldn't have them. And I said, do you think I'm crazy? That's always like, do you think I'm crazy? Is my most, and I was like, I definitely don't think you're crazy. This was a really smart, together woman. I was like, I definitely don't think you're crazy. I haven't heard that, but I have so much respect for my clients' experiences. And so I started digging, and, statins can affect men's ejaculatory. So I was like, okay, Bat Sheva, I need to, and that's how I feel like this entire industry is, because it's so new. Like we just don't understand stuff. So the more we get, the more we understand things, the better we can all be working together on it.
Boy, that concept of, I'm just thinking all the things you're talking about with respect to sex and sexuality, the body image stuff. I mean, again, male therapist here, but I've worked with lots and lots of women for the 26 years I've been in private practice. Have I ever had a woman come in and say, I'm just fine with my body, that's not my problem? Never. Nobody
she's
says
always
that.
blaming herself. Like she feels like
of course.
She goes on diet after diet after diet. None of them work, and nobody blames the diet. They blame themselves, right? So what is actually happening, and how much? And then they're told, you're eating because you're nervous. You're eating because, and some of those things are true, but what's causing what. It's the whole thing is just super interesting when I think about hormones and how dramatic hormones affect our brains with our sex lives, and how that what we do with our relationships affects our hormones, and then understanding that with weight is just I think it's a really fascinating topic. But
Yeah. Even the notion of appetite itself, the sexual appetite, food appetite. There's all kinds of things like that. And
Definitely.
interesting. Well, we'll look forward to that, and
don't worry, it's many years down the line.
So you'll have that written next year, and we'll talk to you. When you do, we'll have you on the show. So.
I hope you'll have me back before that, because that's not going to happen for a long time. Okay, great.
Yeah, I was just going to say
we love having you.
We love having you.
Well, it's a totally fun conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. And so thank you for doing this as always.
And good luck with the book.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Bat Sheva. We certainly did. Again, she's always a pleasure to talk to, and is a wealth of information about sex, and particularly women and their sex lives. So again, her book is called Sex Points, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So thank you, Bat Sheva. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us and we could put on the air on our show, you can send them to Bruce at brucechalmer.com, or visit the website, brucechalmer.com.
And when you visit the website, brucechalmer.com, what you'll see there is a podcast tab. That's a handy way for you, first of all, to get access to all of our episodes. And also, there's a way you can suggest yourself or somebody else as someone we might want to interview. We've been contacted by more and more folks. It's kind of apparently this thing is starting to catch on. People, we're hearing from these people we've never heard of who want to be on the show, and some of them we've put on the show, and it's really
we're just
been
delighted.
Great.
We've had wonderful guests, and perhaps you can be one of our guests.
Perhaps you can. So go ahead and suggest that. Of course, also topics. And again, as Judy said, if you want to write in a letter, that's where we get these letters that we share with our interviewees, or in the episodes that it's just the two of us, we talk about as well. So please feel free to do that. And again, please go get a hold of my book, Reigniting the Spark: Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back. You can get that anywhere books are sold. I just mentioned briefly the whole idea of that subtitle, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back. There's a lot in that subtitle. That's one of the big insights of the book, is how we need both stability and intimacy, and often the skills you need for the two of those things are different, and they somewhat are in conflict, and that makes for interesting times in couples. So anyway, that's often a light bulb moment for the couples I work with. So hey, read the book and check it out. And when you do that, it would be even another wonderful thing you could do besides just read the book is review it. Put a review, especially on Amazon. That's where that's how the algorithms push things up higher on the top of lists. So we would love it if you would do that as well. And so, until next time,
remember, be kind,
don't panic,
and have faith.